So we're lucky to have two folks with us today who are going to share some tools and experiences. Both have in common having spent some time at the breakthrough design and innovation firm IDEO. So it's fun to hear folks that are used to solving problems creatively and making things out of nothing. And so I'm really excited to hear what they each have to share. And they each are passionate about things, but they're passionate about complementary things. So Ella Bonheur is passionate about enabling people to articulate and amplify their own natural ways of getting unstuck. And she has created this tool, the Innovator's Compass, that we're going to learn more about. And it is a free thing that includes other resources to use it more and share your experiences. So very excited about that. She also is a faculty person at Olin College of Engineering and has brought product design and other design disciplines into the world through that educational role. And Rebecca Chesney is passionate about food, coincidentally, and is currently with Guggenheimer as their director of sustainability innovation, but is a food anthropologist, which I'm endlessly curious about. So a lot of folks coming in with design chops, but then applying it to helping us all be creative, and then also going deep into food systems, which is what we all do every day. So we're going to let them say a little bit about themselves and then get rolling with some of the tools and stories that we're going to have in the mix for today. So I'll hand it off to Ella and Rebecca.
Thank you. I'll come in first and I'm taking up the screen share here. All right. Hope everybody sees a bunch of maps.
We do.
Great. Okay. Well, as an engineer, designer, leader, coach, facilitator, educator, and parent, I've gotten to know a lot of different maps out there for different kinds of challenges. You might, let's see, not advance. There we go. You might recognize some of these from design and leadership to learning and reflection and science and startups. You might have used some of these. And it felt to me like those maps all had kind of a common compass, just like maps of Paris and New York might have. And when I laid out their steps, it turns out they do. And I spent a decade distilling those until people of different backgrounds could unleash, not teach, that same compass in all of these different kinds of challenges. That came down to 5 questions that move us forward, asking at the center who's involved, seeing people fully, not just through the challenge, and together exploring details and different pictures of what's happening and why. So we have some real observations to go on, but we can get overwhelmed with details. So asking what matters most here, being able to zoom out to find some clear guiding stars or principles for whatever we do. We can get stuck with no ideas or just one idea to do what matters most. So asking what different ways, plural, are there to do this? Some wide open space to dream without worrying about details yet. But then we can get stuck with ideas and no action. So finally asking what's a step to try a small but real experiment back down to real details so we can see what happens, maybe something else that matters or a different idea, and build up those experiments. And we have these in us. They are how we see anything we do. And when we're stuck, we're missing something. Which is why the different processes remind us to ask these questions in their own words and ways. So, and design thinking that we came from, the branding that Eric is talking about, we'll do that as well. So we can just ask these more in any order, this order, the numbered order, any way to move us forward, or for seconds or years. And people have suggested lots of different formats that you'll find, again, all free at innovatorscompass.org, along with a video of this 2-minute introduction. And all I ask is that people share back stories, and I'm grateful that they do, from preschool conflicts to the US Conference on AIDS to rural communities where people have been using these same 5 questions and have translated into 18 African languages alone, which is pretty exciting. So stories. Rebecca is going to share highlights of a project where she used the same compass in her own words and ways.
Yes, thank you. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you and to hear so much of what you're all sharing of challenges in the food system. So as Eric mentioned, I'm currently Director of Sustainability Innovation with Guggenheimer, which is a large food service operator. I'm sitting in an office in San Francisco. We do mostly corporate food service. And previously I was with IDEO, where Ella also has some experience in, and sort of for the last decade, my focus has been really helping usually the larger players in the food industry understand what the future could hold and the important decisions that they make and how they impact people across the food system. So I'm going to share an example of a project that I did when I was with IDEO. And the idea here is to kind of show the compass and how you might apply it in your work. And I'll share some of the examples of how using the design process and creating concepts and creating prototypes can kind of also help as you're working on getting unstuck. So feel free to kind of ask some questions as I'm going, but I think we'll go through the example and then Ella will walk you all through a process for using the compass to kind of work on your own challenge where you're feeling stuck. And I'm here for the whole time, so I'll be listening and kind of maybe offering some ideas as we go. Okay, so you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
So from 2019 to 2021, I was a lead for a program we had at IDEO called the Circular Economy of Food CoLab. And this was a program that was focused on pre-competitive collaboration. So bringing together companies that operate in the food industry to really understand what a circular economy of food could look like. And very much using the design process of building concepts, building prototypes, and getting really tangible, as you can see in the video here. Of course, we had to adjust the project I'll be sharing we did during the pandemic. So we switched to doing a lot of virtual prototyping, which you'll see some examples of what that looked like. So the idea was really working together to identify shared challenges and collaboratively build prototypes to show what the future could look like. And you see in the bottom, we had several corporate members who kind of paid to be in this program. So everything I'm sharing is not public. There are aspects of it that are public. So I'd ask that you feel free to take notes as I'm describing the process, but please, don't share beyond this group. But our corporate members were Danone, Electrolux, and Kroger. So we had an interesting mix of a packaged good company, Electrolux, so really focus on appliances and things like food waste in the home and helping people understand how to use their fridges and their freezers to reduce waste. And then Kroger. So Kroger, of course, is a retailer, but also like many retailers, it also is a packaged goods company because retailers do have their private label brands. So there's, always something to keep in mind with retailers. And then on the right, you'll see, we really took a food systems approach. All the little circles are concepts and prototypes that we built throughout the course of this multi-year program. And we were really looking at how do we kind of break down some of the fragmentation, some of the silos that exist in the food system, and use prototypes as a way of helping us learn together what the food system could look like. So some of the projects that we did were really looking on how we could reduce upstream farm loss. And so we had a variety of design sprints. You see on the right here, one of our design briefs. We always tried to have kind of a fun name, value add before it goes bad. And there was always a design question. So how might we create viable infrastructure and business models to ensure food grown for people doesn't go to waste, which sounds a lot like some of the stuckness I heard on the call earlier so far. And so we gathered a group of people together, including data scientists, designers. We also would bring in people from organizations like WWF, World Wildlife Fund, and others who really kind of understand the food system to create some prototypes. And we had several that were focused on kind of this topic of upstream waste. And some of the things that kept coming up as we were working on a variety of projects was the role of procurement. So we kept hearing things like, one of the reasons why we might have loss is because our growers are really trying to meet what they've agreed to in a purchase order. And so kind of the role that procurement plays in really impacting what growers do, and also once the food is grown, where it goes, does it get harvested, does it not? A lot of it comes down to procurement and the price that's paid, and of course related to that, the infrastructure. And as we were building these prototypes and doing a lot of this learning, also looking at what's going on in the food system and what's going on in the industry. So you'll see here an article from Civil Eats from around this time in 2019. There was a study at Santa Clara University with some California growers of specialty crops. And the study found that even the growers themselves were underestimating how much loss was happening on their farm. So we kept seeing these questions, and we realized, how do we really understand this relationship between procurement and growers, not only for food loss, but also at the same time, as we think about so many of the conversations happening right now in the food system around how do we diversify what we grow, how do we shift to more regenerative farming. A big piece of it is if we are going to have farmers buying seeds to plant cover crops or diversify their rotations, how can we help pay for that? And also, how can we create markets for these more diversified foods? So really, this question of procurement is really fundamental to so many different pieces of the food system, not just waste. So then we set out to do a project to really understand this relationship between growers and procurement. And by procurement leaders in the middle here, again, we were really looking at the procurement leaders in these larger companies who are working on ensuring that they have product to put on shelves. One thing I learned talking to a potato and onion procurement specialist is, you've got to have potatoes this time of year, Thanksgiving. I was having these conversations back in 2021, this time of the year. Got to have potatoes because people want, you got to have your mashed potatoes for the Thanksgiving meal. So, these procurement leaders are really thinking a year in advance, but really focused on making sure they have the product when it's needed at the store. So we kind of looked at what's happening and why. So some of the things coming up is that procurement, their role is really to purchase a set amount of product at a particular specification, whether that's, organic or not, whether that's strawberries of this size versus strawberries of that size. So really that's a big piece of what procurement currently is set up to do. And then, that research from Santa Clara and some of the other growers in the research, we can see that sometimes growers are planting more than what they need in order to make sure they meet those contracted volumes, because certain things are going to happen. There's going to be strawberries that have blotches and things on them, and they're not going to meet the PO requirements. And so there's sort of an over planting that can happen, but it still requires labor, it still requires seed, it still requires water and other costs. And then ultimately the grower is not compensated for that, for those costs. And then kind of in a sort of a mindset paradigm way, one of the major aspects of regenerative farming and really local food systems, as you all know this way better than I do, is that the food system is it's relational. Regenerative farming, looking at waste differently, it requires that we be in relationship with the land, with the environment, with each other. And procurement is very transactional. I have a contract and I get this amount and it needs to be on the truck at this date. And then this quote here is something that came up in one of the research conversations as we were building a prototype focused on farm loss, is never underestimate the power of a PO, purchase order. So we kept hearing these things and we wanted to kind of understand, okay, if this is the current state, if this is what we're observing, what's behind this? What matters most to procurement leaders and growers? And so we conducted design research to do this. And design research is really a process of speaking to people who might be, if you're developing a tool, a product, I've got a mouse here. So whoever designed this mouse, you might go and actually, observe and speak with the people that might be the end user of a product. In food systems, this room, if I don't move, the lights will go off at certain points. So hopefully you can see me. I'm kind of in the dark here. But, one of the things I think about within food systems a lot is, there's often a big focus on consumer, which is very important. But also, and this is what this project was really trying to do, there are people all across the supply chain. It's really an interconnected web of people who are involved in making our food system what it is, empowering the food system. And so, how do we also understand those people and their needs? So, what we did, and this is part of the benefit, I was super lucky to work with a bunch of designers. So you see here a lot of visuals. I did not create these. People who are experts in graphic design and they made these. And basically the idea is to develop some concepts and do some brainstorming and then translate those brainstorms into something tangible that people can react to. And that's a big piece of the design process. If you ask someone what they need, they might tell you one thing, but if you actually observe them, you might see some opportunities to fill an unmet need. Or if you put something in front of people, sometimes you get a different reaction because you've given them something to react to, as opposed to trying to pull everything out of their brain in a conversation. And for me, working at IDEO, that was one of the biggest takeaways that I had. Not being someone who is a graphic designer and sort of a maker, is how to think about making my work more tangible so that I can have these breakthrough conversations. So one example, on the bottom left, you see a slide that has these blue tiles. This was a very simple thing we did. Again, this was all virtual research, where we've had a bunch of tiles that said things like water, climate change, prices, a variety of things. And we put that in front of all of our research participants on a Zoom. And we said, which of these are matter most to you? And we would kind of, as they were talking, we would drag and drop them to the box on the right. And so at the end of a series of research interviews, we could look across, because we use the same tool for every conversation. We could look across and find commonalities and seek patterns. So that's kind of one way of getting very tangible on a pretty simple question. So then from there, what we understood is growers want to be able to make decisions for their farm. Fundamentally, growers and procurement are both in the business of risk mitigation. That's a lot of what growers are doing, is understanding weather and other factors to mitigate their risk. That's exactly what procurement is about. This came up earlier as well. Growers are not marketers, but they need markets to be able to diversify what they grow, so they have a buyer on the other end, and also to be able to maximize their profit. And then we also heard from many people working in procurement that procurement knows the supply chain is changing. They're hearing from farmers that there's more extreme weather, that crops are shifting over time. But procurement is really focused, and they're incentivized around meeting those contracts. They're not really incentivized to have kind of conversations with growers that really support long-term thinking. So based off of that understanding, we went back to our research participants to say, okay, we know some of the things that matter to you around risk, around short-term versus long-term thinking. Of course, farmers are very much long-term thinkers. And so we said, okay, let's actually see if we can prototype and start to get a little bit more tangible around a contract that would better represent the needs of growers and the needs of procurement leaders. And we kind of struggled in the beginning. How do you prototype a contract? And this is a really great example of how you can take something that seems pretty abstract and start to get tangible and start to put pieces together. So one of the things that we did in research, we went back to the same people we had spoken with before, and we had a slide. So this is, again, just in Google Slides. And we had some different features that might go into a contract. So for instance, long-term contracts that require rotations and biodiversity. Maybe there's a bonus built into the contract. And we basically had 5 stars on the slide. And in our research interviews, we asked each person, place these 5 stars where you would put them. Help us understand. We think we know what matters to you, but what type of contract, what type of transaction would help meet your needs? So again, we did this across all of our research interviews. And then from there, we had a set of patterns and things that we could look at. And of course, as you're having conversations and people are selecting a star, you can ask, tell me why you selected that. Or, you hear Hannes had a big star on the top one. So when we had that conversation with him, we really wanted to understand, why is that star so much bigger? So one of the things you'll hear people who have experienced IDEO say is, one of the things you've learned working there is there's kind of a saying of bring a prototype to every meeting. So come prepared to kind of put something in front of someone, and that way they have something to react to, and you can have a richer conversation. So then from there, we really understood, okay, what are some ideas forward? So one is, thinking in terms of harvests and whole crops, not just what you need from a procurement standpoint. And there are some efforts to look at whole harvest contracts and things like that to make sure farmers are remunerated for everything they grow, not just what the procurement team wants to use. There could be, we also learned a lot about non-financial incentives, such as access to technical assistance as being really important. And also really the importance of trusted third parties, whether that's extension agents, agronomists, ag retailers, or others that are in the ecosystem that can kind of help mitigate and help this relationship between procurement and growers. So from there, what we actually ended up prototyping was a simple tool called a contract builder. And really what this prototype was, and we created kind of a digital mock-up, and it walked people through the process. But the idea was to actually show a different way forward in terms of how procurement and growers work together. How do they negotiate? Can a procurement team include things like technical assistance, like bonuses or price premiums? And then can a grower take a look at that contract and say, this is what I really need on my farm? And then we also had some ideas in here around having those trusted third parties, such as USDA data sets or what have you, so that any evidence for what the grower needs and what procurement can support would have that grounding. And so that was the prototype that we made. And the goal was really to shift the conversation within these big companies around what their procurement teams are really meant to be doing, to help them understand and help these companies understand procurement today is about mitigating costs. But for a lot of companies, if procurement procures differently today, that actually helps mitigate long-term risk in the supply chain. And if you're a company like Kroger, if you're a company like Danone needs dairy, and Danone also for silk and their other plant-based products, they need almonds, they need soy. And so it's really in their best interest to ensure that they're doing things today to stabilize their supply chains in the future. And so some of the ideas that came out of this was, companies could join efforts to help harmonize data capture from growers. There could be new partnerships set up with local extension agents and others around technical assistance. There could be some ideas around helping to fund that for growers. Setting up a pilot plot where farmers and procurement can learn together. Since we heard from some procurement leaders, they want to learn more about farming and they just don't ever have the time. And so that was some of what came out of this work. So I hope that I know it's probably a lot, but I hope that kind of shows you a little bit how we walk through this process and how you can get even tangible, even on some pretty abstract things like a contract.
Awesome. Yeah, and folks are resonating with aspects of that along the way. Thank you so much. Ella, are we back to you? You might be muted.
Yeah, so that was amazing. Thank you so much, Rebecca. That really just brought the compass to life, along with, I think, a lot of, I saw a lot of resonance in the chat about some of the things that you were talking about. So that's super exciting. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen again here and find the chat again. And so we'd love to give you guys a chance to play with this a little bit yourselves, especially now that we have Rebecca here who can add her wisdom to what you're experiencing. So we're going to drop a link in the chat here. And in it, you will find some Google Slides that have a whole bunch, of compasses in them. And so you can just go in, if you click on that link, you should be able to jump in and grab a blank slide that looks like any one of these. They're all the same. They have the same questions. They're just kind of different styles that people have suggested over the years. So whatever floats your boat. So you should be able to jump in and grab one. Let's see if people are coming in here. You should be able to see, if you look on the left, whether there's a person on a given slide. You'll see people's little icons if they're on a slide, and then you can jump in and put whatever your stuck topic was that you shared in your breakout group, whatever's feeling stuck or just useful for you to try to work on right now. You can put that on top and then put a couple of the people involved in the middle. There's some little sticky notes on top that you can pull down, or just make a text box or whatever works for you. There's no sort of right or wrong here. So we're grabbing a slide, putting our topic on top and the people in the middle. Maybe you can give us a thumbs up when, like a visual thumbs up when you've got it.
If anybody's confused, feel free to raise your hand and we'll redirect you, but hopefully folks can grab that link from Ella from 3:53 p.m. Eastern time.
And if for some reason this digital format's not working for you, you can also just journal as we go along. You just won't be able to have Rebecca looking at what you're creating, or each other. So you can see on the left here if there's anyone else in there with you. And we're starting this kind of a lot later than we thought we would. So we're probably just going to sort of touch on this a little bit just to get you started and encourage you to keep playing with it as you can. So I'll go ahead and get started. I see definitely some people in here. Some people might need to jump to a different slide because I see like a couple of slides, like 9 and 4 have 2 people on them. There's a lot of people in number 2. So if you see on the left side there, if you see a bunch of different little avatars, little circles on that, then you might need to jump on a different slide so you're not on the same slide as other people. There's lots and lots. There's like 50 something. And if, again, feel free to just journal otherwise. And that's fine too. So does everybody have, so at least remember the topic that they were feeling stuck about?
I just wanted to clarify, we should be using a topic that's related to procurement.
Honestly, anything that's really useful to you.
Yeah, no, that procurement was Rebecca's story, but your story is your story. So think back to the check-in and what was on your mind or any stuckness you're experiencing. So it's really a tool for your own work in your own value chain.
Okay, I came in late, so I missed that part.
Yeah, no
Thank you.
worries.
We were in breakouts, so whatever you said in your breakout, and I'm mindful that I think we were hoping to actually wrap this up and we're just getting started, but we'll just do a little bit. So put your people in the middle. Who are the people involved? And Rebecca really hit on just very different stakeholders that are involved in any of these sorts of challenges. So putting the different people who are involved in the middle and just taking a moment to see them as people. Hopefully people are following along. So much easier in person to see. The only instruction you'll find on every version of Innovators Compass is with and for everyone involved to explore these questions, explore them with and for everything that everyone involved has, brings to the table, their hearts, their minds, their ears, their eyes. Those people are not here right now, and that's okay, because the most powerful thing to discover new possibilities is truly the question mark. So you can let things out with lots of question marks and just put questions into it and then go discover, just like Rebecca did. So we're going to do that right now. If you haven't already started playing, dive down for some details. Talking about leverage points, the way we find those is when we look at different sides of what's happening right now in our stuckness, in our system. What are some upsides, some bright spots? What are the challenges in what's happening right now and why? And you're not going to be able to write all of what's happening, but if you can write 2 very different sides, just 2 different thoughts, and 1 question about what's happening and why. Just let them out as a start. Let us know. falling here. I need to move this so I can see the chat. And then I'll do a share out. And I don't know if Rebecca's able to see what people
Yeah,
are.
I can see. And also I added my compass to this deck, so as an example, so that you have access to it afterwards.
Fantastic.
Yes.
I'm glad you could do that. Okay. So if you see a couple of interesting ones you want to call out, just a couple of interesting.
Okay, I see some observations around, yeah, the role of transportation and how difficult that is. So how to bring logistics and even a shipping background into the conversation.
You know,
Yeah.
the things that people mention is their stuckness, like around infrastructure, like again, definitely in rural places. Like I'm sure there's places where there's so much missing, and also, what's the flip side? Like where are things happening right in these places?
Yeah.
All right. So you might just have a couple of things that are happening, an upside and a downside of your stuckness, and maybe one question. If you have, then you can sort of zoom out. There's not a lot to go on, right? You've just thought of a couple of things here, but looking at what's happening for the different people involved, just like Rebecca did, the different stakeholders, what might matter most? You guys talked about values really early on in this call, right? This is like, what do the different stakeholders really value? What is the overlap there? And where is their conflict? Like where that you can tap into, especially when you see the differences in the upsides and the downsides. What's making the difference? What really seems to matter most here? So anyway, what seems to matter most?
One thing that was showing up in the maps is sort of the focus level. Some folks are focused on the project level, and then other stakeholders, maybe funders, are looking for big transformative ideas. And so that how do you bridge between this is the thing that I want to do and the money that I need to do it versus like I want you guys to try to really, change things in a big way. And what does it take to feel the agency or the fully resourced enough to even think that way?
And I loved Rebecca's, like growers need to be able to make decisions. That really matters to them. And both growers and procurement risk mitigation really matters to them, right? Those were a couple of, and diversifying, those were things that mattered most in the example that she gave. Oops. Okay, I got ahead of myself here. Okay, so then with a couple of things that matter, like say, if it is making decisions and diversifying or whatever you found in your challenge, I guess I didn't let Rebecca call some out, but we'll go to the next one and she can jump in there too. What are some ways, more than one, to do what matters most? Really, again, just thinking of like a couple of different ones, and if in doubt, just throw a question mark on it. Just let even crazy ideas come out. Just put a question mark on it. You can explore that question mark later. Change the who, what, when, where, and how of the ways that you normally do things. So I really loved how Rebecca, was thinking both about, ways of thinking holistically about crops, but also like really like concrete things like contracts and incentives, and bringing in different parties. What are just two wildly different ways to do what matters most? And maybe throw one out with a question mark on it. Ton of slides. Oh, good. People are writing some stuff.
Okay, sorry, I got kicked out of the room. So I'm back on. I'll take a look at the slides.
Can't kick out our star speaker. That won't do. Some people might just be generaling these. Okay, so hopefully everybody has like a couple of different ways of doing what matters most in their challenge. Have you seen some interesting principles or ideas here, Rebecca? There's not a ton on the slide. Some people might be.
Yeah.
Ooh, listening to community matters
I'm
most.
curious to if Yeah, and I'm curious if there are thoughts around, I think what can be challenging on what matters most is how much do we, you know, how do we understand from the people involved what matters most? And I'm curious if some of the examples I shared on how to do that kind of research and, have, even if like the example of a simple slide where you put boxes and you ask people, drag over what are the top three that you, or add if there's something missing, add it. I'm kind of curious if people are taking away ideas around even how to approach these conversations with different tools. That would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I love these. Just grab one idea that I'm seeing. Ooh, wow. Computer food halls, food delivery, farmers markets, like different scales of things, right? Different whens and wheres. Nice work. Okay. And then we'll just keep moving in the interest of time. Again, this is just a sampling that you can go deeper on later. So you have these different possibilities that you've explored, and you've hopefully raised a couple of questions, much like Rebecca did in her project. So going from that like blue sky dreaming, big picture, back down to details, what's a specific step that you could try? Whether it's to go ask a question, whether it's to make a quick prototype of something like she did, like of a contract. What's something that you could do or ask in your challenge? And I wanted to give people the opportunity to make use of people in this Zoom room with them. You'll see there's a second set of slides in here where you can put your name and something that you can ask your peers or ask your peers for. So feel free to use one of those. And then after the call, people can go in there and look and see what they can offer each other. But here it's about getting down to something so small and so specific that you're going to do it. It has a specific who, what, where, or how. And if it's scary, just make it smaller. Like I'm going to call this person. I'm going to send this email. I'm going to sketch up this thing.
I see something in here around, this is really specific, looking into the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's rural and special purpose credit programs. I love how specific that is. Like that's something that you could go and do later today or tomorrow. So you start that process or find people who are experts in that area to speak with. So that was very specific.
Yeah, the what's happening and why that led to that was legal issues pertaining to programs with a focus on specific populations. So just so folks can see the through line there.
So this was just a really quick taste of what it feels like to explore a little bit of the people who are involved, a little bit of what's happening, what matters most, what ways there are to do something about that, what steps there are to try, so you can kind of get a feel for this compass, which is what you use all the time when you are making things better. It's just naming it so that we can all use it together in a really powerful way. Might just ask for a couple of quick reflections and then and maybe do some Q&A. I know it's just a little taste, but so coming back to observations, and love now to just observe what we just experienced, even in tiny way. Using our hands, I guess most people are not showing. So instead of maybe using fingers, maybe we can just write in the chat. Which of these, even from this little taste, which of these 5 questions maybe felt like it started to get you thinking in a different way or move you forward? And it's just different for every challenge. Sometimes you're more stuck in one place or another, but did one or more of these, 1 through 5, kind of jog something in your stuck challenge?
And feel free to just put to a number 1 to 5 in there. We see 2 and 5, 3, the principles. I saw some interesting things on the principles coming in. 2. Anybody else like a particular step?
I know that was officially the quickest compass workshop I've ever run. So thanks for running with it.
Yeah, we've got the most votes on step 2. So if you want to say more on that one.
Well, and I'm seeing a little bit of each of them because I'm seeing what ways are there. I'm seeing step three, so all of them from different perspectives. Yeah, what my experience is in a physical room when we do this and we split up is that it just really is very evenly divided by where you are in your challenge. You might see you just really not totally clear on what's happening yet, and so discovering things or questions will help there, or you're stuck, in the weeds and need to see what matters most in a fresh way. It just really depends, and that's the beauty of it. Everything's different. I'm gonna
One thing,
search. Yeah, Rebecca, go for it.
well, one thing that I would add, I think for me, the what matters most, I think that can be an interesting question, especially when you are talking about different people, because that, like in the example of procurement and growers, what actually matters most to both of them is, or one of the pieces that matters most is that risk mitigation piece. Now, the challenge is growers bear the risk today of changing how they farm. Procurement bears the risk in the future if we don't mitigate climate change. So there's a time element that we have to figure out. But ultimately, they both really care about mitigating those risks and making sure that their businesses are going concerns, because farms are businesses. So I think that question can also help identify root causes, either root causes, or it can also help identify potential solutions where you can bring multiple people to the table because this topic of risk in that example matters to both. So that can be helpful when you're working on very layered, multi-stakeholder challenges like you have within a food system.
That's absolutely perfect. When it's easy, what matters most is simple. When it's hard, what matters most to different people might be in conflict, but that's where our creativity comes in. You need to see both of those things and see different ways forward.
Ella, do you have any comments on connecting the dots between what matters most and steps to try? Because those can be the sort of the two, like, I know what I believe in, but I don't know what to do, right? I'm all about moving food, but how do I bring it back to my values?
Um, yeah, sorry, connecting which one to steps to try?
What matters most and what step to try? Because those seems like the poles of, like, I'm just seeing folks like really leaning on the value side, but then also like we're doing stuff every day and trying to get this school to get these carrots. And
Yeah. I mean, I think just letting yourself with and for the people involved, like holding all those different things that matter most and just starting to imagine lots of ways of doing it so that you're not stuck with one and like, oh my gosh, what if this doesn't work? And then finding the smallest, concrete step that seems like it does what matters most and just trying it. And I think Rebecca probably found this, that a lot of times and you find this, right? When you try something, if you've identified what matters most and you try something, often it has even a small thing that's aligned with what matters most will make a big difference, like a change in a contract or a change in, something small can actually make a very big difference. I know that our time is kind of running low. I was going to say at the same time, I wrote this up here, but I didn't say it out loud, to go ahead and put questions in here in the chat too.
do you want to say a little bit about what folks could do afterwards as we head towards the end of our sort of allotted time?
Yes. So feel free to put asks in the second half of those slides for each other because you're such an amazing resource. So if you found, in your stuck challenge that you'd love people to answer a question or point you to a resource, ask them for it, and other people go visit those and answer. And I did make the last slide there. The last two slides, one's a reflection slide for yourself if you'd like, and then the very last slide is for us, observations and ideas that we'd love to hear about how to make this talk better or what you experienced.
And then we could put this link for this into our discussion group so folks can access it there. Is that right?
Yeah. Any questions for Rebecca while we have her amazing mind and experience?
John or Whitney, you want to pick up on what you put in there and see if Rebecca has any thoughts on that, or I could read them a little.
Yeah, I don't have much to say other than what I wrote. I mean, it's relationships evolve over time. You get to an equilibrium, and it's kind of tough to shake that equilibrium, even if it's one that isn't particularly advantaged towards growers. It's the buyers that have the funds. They're the ones that are driving the train.
Well, I saw something interesting there that it is fun for anthropologists to think about how sticky culture is, and that, if people don't want to change, like whatever the idea is, bumps up against that cultural sort of, this is what we do and this is how we do it. Was that in your thought, John?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Anything
Yeah,
there, Rebecca?
that's exactly what I was going to say. The relationships are in a context. And so it's important to understand that context. Actually, one of my favorite things, if some of you are probably familiar with understanding ag and the work that they do with growers, and there's sort of 5 agreed upon soil health principles. They have a 6th, which I love, which is know your context. And so I think that is really important. And so it's helpful to understand, okay, what's the context for this grower? What's the context for the company or whoever that procurement person, wherever they sit. But also one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, because some of the growers that I've spoken with who have gone against the grain, sometimes it's because they had several years of drought or they had some sort of catastrophe. And same thing on the corporate leader side. Sometimes it's their children who help them see differently, or some major life catastrophe. And I've been trying to think about, how do we get more breakthroughs for starting to do things differently without requiring going through a catastrophe first. I mean, you could arguably say our food system is already kind of going through a catastrophe. But that is something I've been thinking a lot about, because our food system, kind of runs along, and so it's just a large context we're all in to try to shift it. And that's also where policy and other things come in too. Like, I don't want to lose the fact that yes, prices are important, but also subsidies and all of these other things that play into that risk mitigation framework that a grower might have. So yeah,
Thank you.
lots of
I just
context.
want to note that we're at time, so if folks need to go, no problem. But if folks want to stay another minute or two, I can stay. So,
I also just posted, there's a resource in the chat. I'm a member of the Aspen Institute's Student Leaders Fellowship, and it's an amazing fellowship that's fully funded. And the applications are currently open for the next cohort. So recommend that you all take a look at this and see if it would support your work, and apply if you're interested. I think the applications are due in a few weeks.
Rebecca, anything else on this idea of a disaster being needed for a change to occur? It comes up a lot in the climate scenarios that I run, and we see it now with this Baxter facility in North Carolina that just got taken offline. So a lot of the IV fluids and things that were needed for healthcare services in hospitals were disrupted because of the concentration of the amount of that product that comes through this one facility. And it's not unlike what we saw with the meat processing issue with COVID. Anything around that sort of, we need a disaster to change, or that you've seen in your work?
I sometimes wonder what's human nature and what's not. I mean, I think you see it oftentimes, even individuals as eaters. A lot of times people might shift. There's sort of known key moments, I think, in behavioral science, like for instance, when a child leaves the home and goes to college, or there's sort of moments where you have a disruption in your life, and that can also be a moment where change can happen. But you also hear stories of people, they get a cancer diagnosis or something major like that, and then they shift the way that they eat. So I honestly don't. It's a question that I have often, of how much is it human nature to, in some ways, require going through an experience in order to do something differently versus not. I think the other challenge is the number of times that I've heard. So like Norman Borlaug had even said, my understanding is that the Green Revolution, this will last for maybe 10, 20 years, was never meant to be a long-term solution. And similarly, even the healthcare system in the US, it was a stopgap after the war. It wasn't meant to be the long-term, this is the system we need. So I keep hearing over and over of societal systems that are now kind of the status quo and the way things are. They were never meant to be long-term solutions. So there's also something in there around, once you start putting a system in place and everything else builds around it, you have businesses popping up to support that system, how endemic it becomes and how hard it can be to change. So I have more questions than answers, I think, on that.
Yeah, well, it is interesting that people were putting into
Yeah.
the chat sometimes like USDA,
Yeah.
like the federal infrastructure is trying to push people to be transformative, and folks on the ground are like, I just want to get my project done and have nobody else interfere with it. So it's interesting how that,
Yeah.
you know, the stickiness of social structures can come from different levels of the system.
Exactly. Yeah.
Debbie, do you have any insights on that, having been in that world for a while?
I'm sorry. It's,
Oh, sorry,
okay.
Ella's got to go.
Really, I have to take a child to music lessons. I'm sorry, I need to.
Thanks, Ella. Thanks so much. And feel free again, folks, if you need to go. We're going to wrap in a couple minutes, but.
And I'd love anybody's reflections, and also the team. Love to reflect at any time or over email. Thank you, guys. Thank you all so much for having.
Thank you, Ella.
Thanks,
This was great.
Ella.
Thank you.
So Eric, just real quick. So it's funny that you said that, because I'm sitting here and I was starting to write something in the chat about that last remark about the stickiness on the USDN, and I actually think that's very, very true. It is frustrating because, well, you know, it was one thing to talk about innovation when a lot of these grant programs were originally authorized, right? And there was very little investment going in these sectors. And now we're looking, what, 15 years later? And sometimes the demand for that, right, is not what the authorization, the scope of the authorization allows, and what the priorities look like are not at all what's going on in the sector. It doesn't, you know, keep pace. It doesn't give probably enough attention to what are the requirements of a sector that's sort of an intermediate stage of development, not a beginning or early adopter stage of development. So I would just say, yeah, I think that's a valid point. And you know, what I tell people, since what I do part-time is really provide consultation on federal grants, is on USD grants in particular, and especially ones from AMS where I used to work, is, you know, really depend on your logic model, because it really, what you're looking at should flow from what are your conditions on the ground. And most of the time, you know, while they may ask for the stars, they will accept something less than if your proposal is well structured and well defended. So, but yeah, I think it's unrealistic. I mean, if you think about the ways that I'm trying to say this quickly, but sorry, the thing about the ways that regulations and in legislative authorities are developed and made, okay, it's such a crapshoot because of pretty much Congress says you must do all these things. They're largely impossible, and they leave it to the agency to decide, and then the agency changes leadership, and so the orientation of so many of these programs changes, and we don't really know what that's going to look like for a future. And so it's very, very hard to solve this particular problem. I guess that's where I wanted to go with my answer.
Yeah, and it does bring us back to the intersection between the values and the trying stuff, and how do they come, you know, where do they meet?
Right.
Andrew, any thoughts or timing thoughts or content thoughts?
I'm gonna have to go in a minute too, but you can tell it's a good topic when people stick around for this, and I think it just, the compass opens up so many good questions, and seeing the comment about the chat about food banks and pantries and how that has become entrenched as well. So I hope people will keep using, you know, the tool. We'll make sure we share that, and then maybe even prompt Eric. Let's do that later on so people can go back and look at the questions or requests that were shared to keep that going.
Great. Yeah. So we'll make sure that the work that everybody did is accessible and folks can continue to add to it and ask questions, and we'll support that. Just want to, while we're here, thank Rebecca so much for your time and your insights and the work you've been doing, and everybody for what they've added to the conversation today. Super interesting. And we're going to continue with this theme of finding leverage points in our system, but not just the big system, but your value chain. So hopefully we did our job today in terms of connecting the dots with what you're actually dealing with, and we want to continue to support that.
Can I just make a 30-second comment to what Andrew just said? Just that, congratulations on your new report, looking at the new value chains that have developed, but working with the feeding assistance over the past 4 years, certainly prompted by the pandemic. I think that's a perfect example of opportunities and in you know, issues that have arisen that haven't been fully addressed in a lot of our marketing work and our logistics work. And so I would just say that's something to tie into to some of these burning issues that we've looked at today.
Thank you.
Right,
Yeah,
especially
I'll share the
since
report with everyone in the group as well.
But especially with funding continuing, because half of the
Mhm.
anxiety was around a cliff, and now we don't have the cliff problem, but we have the how do you really continue to evolve
We
this
don't know
model?
what funding is going to look like in the future. So
Right. Well,
Yeah.
today at least.
today, at least, exactly.